Hello everyone, my name is Seth, and today I'm going to give you my review of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is the 8th and supposedly final film in the Mission Impossible franchise. At least that's what they're saying for now. You know how things work in Hollywood. We'll see a few years from now if this is truly the last one, but as of now, they're treating it as the last Mission Impossible film. We have been on an absolutely incredible streak for the Mission Impossible films. The last, four, I would say, are some really incredible action films. Like, truly, some of the best action films I can think of. I absolutely loved the last few, and I was so incredibly excited for this. Unfortunately, I do think I have to say that this is a flawed finale, even though I still enjoyed it. But before we go any farther, go ahead and like this video, hit subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a video. First, I just want to ask a question. Is it really that hard to just be quiet for like 2.5 hours? Because I don't, maybe I'm the crazy one. Maybe I'm just insane, but I don't think it's that big of a deal to be quiet during a movie. I don't think it's that big of a deal to just not get out your phone and text or be on Snapchat. I've actually had a streak of good theater experiences, so I guess it was about time for me to have a not so great one. But there was a woman next to me that was just talking at full volume. She was just asking questions at full volume. There was a guy like a couple seats down thinking he was Jerry Seinfeld, trying to crack jokes and answer the characters' questions every 5 minutes. And there was a girl in the row in front of me, like getting out her phone, texting people, going on Snapchat. I'm not going to go into a full rant. I have a theater etiquette rant video. I'm going to link it in the descriptions. If you haven't seen that, go and check that out. But we're not here to have me rant about a not so great theater experience. We're here to talk about Mission Impossible. So I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as I wanted to. I still like the film. I still think it's pretty good, but there are quite a few issues that I have with it. I don't think it stands up to the last 3 or 4 Mission Impossible films, but it's still a good time at the theater, and it's a good experience if you are an action fan, or especially if you're a Mission Impossible fan. There are some highs and lows in this film. There's some things in this that I think are absolutely incredible, like top tier filmmaking. And then there's stuff that just kind of leaves me scratching my head a little bit. And most of that stuff happens really in the first half of the film. So I feel like you kind of walk away with a good feeling. I feel like they find their footing about halfway through the film, but the first half of the film, I feel like they really, really struggle. The first thing I want to mention the first thing I kind of want to mention is the pacing. I think the pacing is very, very off, especially in the beginning of the film. The first half of the film almost felt like we were like rushing to get through stuff while also like dragging at the same time. There's this one certain sequence with a submarine when we're about halfway through with the film, and I feel like from that point forward, the pacing is great. I feel like that's really when they start to hit their stride. That's really when the film starts to feel more reminiscent of something like Mission Impossible Fallout or Rogue Nation or Dead Reckoning. But the beginning of the film was just so bizarre to me. It just didn't seem like it was really directed by the same person. Some of the character interactions, some of the character reactions in the beginning of the film just didn't really work for me. It just kind of felt like they should have grown past some of this, especially between the events of the last film and this one. But I completely understand wanting us to go ahead and get into the action. I love it when films do that. I love it when we just kick off right away with some great action, just throw us into the story, let's get going. But that's not how it feels here. The beginning of this film just kind of feels like I walked in late to a showing. Now, I'm not that old, but I do remember VHS and having to rewind them. To me, the beginning of this film almost feels like you start watching the film on the VHS, and you get about a quarter of the way through, you have to stop, you have to go somewhere, something comes up, whatever, you stop watching it, and you never go back and rewind it. And then sometime later, you're like, oh, I want to watch this movie. And you just put it in thinking it's rewinded, and you just kind of start. That's kind of how this feels. And that was a very bizarre feeling to me. There was just one point at the beginning of the film, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, what is happening? What are they thinking with this as the opening to this film? I was like, did the projectionist mess up and start playing this film like 20 minutes into it? So unfortunately, I think the pacing at the beginning of the film really was quite terrible, honestly. But if you're watching this review before you see the film, don't let that scare you off, because the rest of the film really is good. It feels more like the good Mission Impossible films of the last few years. Like I mentioned, there's this one sequence with the submarine. Once you hit that point, I really don't have any complaints with the pacing or any of the cinematography, the editing, anything like that. From that moment on, with the submarine, everything just flows so much more smoothly, so much more effortlessly. The film just works really seamless, and it builds tension really effectively. The main villain in this film is still the AI from Dead Reckoning, and Gabriel is still also kind of a secondary antagonist here. But that's actually where one of my complaints comes from, is the AI. I feel like the AI in Dead Reckoning had kind of like an overwhelming presence. I feel like you couldn't go anywhere without the presence of the AI. It just feels like it's looming over the story and over these characters. But I really don't feel like that here. Ethan has maybe one conversation with the AI. We get the AI's plan. We know kind of what it wants, but it just doesn't feel like we're up against the AI. It doesn't really feel like we're up against villains. It kind of just feels like we're up against time. And that can work, but I don't really think it works in this situation and in this story with how they had it set up. The AI felt a lot more present and a lot more of a threat in Dead Reckoning. And there was one way that Ethan did communicate with the AI that honestly kind of pulled me out of the film for a bit. It just kind of felt out of place for the world that we've established in this franchise. Kind of like I mentioned, they do a decent job of letting us know why the AI is doing certain things. It kind of gives us an idea of like why it wants to wait. It kind of gives us an idea of why the timing for the AI is important, but it just didn't feel like a looming threat. And some of the stuff with Gabriel just didn't quite make sense. He was much more of an intimidating and kind of complete villain in Dead Reckoning. I'm not going to give you any spoilers here, so don't worry about that. I'm going to be kind of vague, but there was this one point in the film where they said Gabriel has to be the one person to do this one thing. But at the conclusion of the film, I just can't help but think, why was that such a big part of the plan? Why did that have such a big focus? Because Gabriel did not do that one thing they said he needed to do, and the plan worked out. The plan honestly would have worked better if you just didn't even have that part about Gabriel at all. Because the one thing that needed to happen happened without him at all. I hope that makes sense. If you go see this film, I'm sure that'll make more sense. I feel like that's just one example, though, of the writing in this film not being as tight as the last few films. In the last few Mission Impossible films, if something didn't make sense right away, you just wait a little bit, they give you a clear answer. Everything's wrapped up so nice. There's not really any plot holes. And even if plot hole is kind of the wrong term to use, I feel like that doesn't apply to this film. I had a lot more questions about this film, about the plans, once I was walking out of the theater. So in the last few films, all of the plans, everything that they were trying to accomplish made sense. It just clicked. I just don't think that every plan, every thread was tied off like they had done in the previous few films. I know that kind of sounds like a lot of negatives, but that's mostly just in the first half of the film. Once we hit that submarine section, everything is just about perfect, really. I know that sounds like a lot of negatives, but that really is mostly applying to the first half of the film. Once we hit that submarine section and we're about halfway through, the rest of the film truly is incredible. It's some top-notch Mission Impossible. It's just really that first half that's dragging down this film. And then maybe there's a couple of threads here and there that I might have questions at the end, but the first half is the half that I have the most issues with. I do think they do a great job of kind of tying in a lot of different things from Ethan's story into this film. One more kind of smaller thing that I do want to bring up is I feel like throughout the course of this film, all of our characters pretty much start and end in relatively the same place. So there's not really a ton of character development here. And in that sense, it does really feel like a part two to Dead Reckoning. I do wish we could have gotten maybe a little bit more character development, but overall, it still works. That's not the biggest complaint that I have with this film. Really, just about the only character development we got was with the character of Benji. He does take on a little bit more of a leadership role, and I do think that was very nice to see. But I think all of the performances in this were good. I don't really think we have any like super standout, like amazing performances that I really need to highlight. It's just that everybody up and down this cast did a really good job. They were just really solid. I will say though, I think Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg do bring just maybe a little bit extra emotion to their roles this time around. And I really, really appreciate that. They did a great job. I'm glad we got to see those two shine a little bit more. The only issues I had with any of the cinematography or the editing, once again, came toward the beginning of the film. I'm almost starting to think that this film should have been longer, which is a little bit crazy to say because it's already 2 hours and 50 minutes. But with how awkward and rushed and just where most of my issues come from the first half, I almost feel like maybe they needed a little bit more time. Maybe this film needed to be 3 hours and 15 minutes. I don't know. Realistically, should be saying that they could cut some time. Maybe it could be like right at 2.5 hours. But with the issues I had in the first half, I almost feel like I have to say maybe they needed a little bit more time. But continuing on with some of my issues with the cinematography and the editing there in the first half, there was this one action sequence right toward the beginning of the film, and I didn't think it was very good. I almost got disoriented because of how many unnecessary cuts there were. And that just really did not feel like a Christopher McQuarrie thing. I feel like there was one point where there was like maybe 7 cuts within a second and a half during an action sequence, and that's just way too many. And for a film franchise over the last 3 or 4 films who have really, really excelled with the action and with how it's filmed, how it's choreographed, how it's edited, this came as a bit of a shock to me. And I'm glad to say that that isn't how it is for the rest of the film. All of the action after that was absolutely fantastic. There was a couple times where I already mentioned there was a submarine sequence, but I loved everything about that. They were able to build tension there, and they put Ethan in a tough situation. They had him think on his feet and make a couple of crazy decisions to get out of that circumstance. There was some really great filmmaking whenever the submarine started to roll a little bit. The camera work, the editing there, all did a great job to really help build the tension. And I'm sure you've seen this on the poster, you've seen it in some of the teasers and some of the promotional videos and the trailers, but that whole action sequence with the planes was absolutely phenomenal. It was probably one of the best action sequences in the Mission Impossible franchise. It is so much fun. It is exhilarating. It is heart racing. And of course, they did that for real. You have Tom Cruise with some cameras out there on the side of an actual plane, and that makes a huge difference. The cinematography that they did there was jaw-dropping. It was beautiful. And them doing that for real, doing that practically, just adds so much. And I love that they've been doing that with these Mission Impossible films for a while now. Putting Tom Cruise on the side of that plane really makes for some incredible and visually breathtaking filmmaking. And that's just part of what makes this franchise so incredibly special. It would just be so easy to do it on a green screen, on a sound studio, but they didn't. They did it for real. And that just adds so much realism. And that makes you feel for these characters so much more. I want more of that in my action movies. The story, the action, the cinematography, and the pacing all work so much better in the second half of this film. It really feels like Mission Impossible Fallout, Rogue Nation, Dead Reckoning, but unfortunately that feeling happens mostly just in the second half. But the film is long enough, that is still a big portion of this movie. But this film, unfortunately, does have some real problems in the first half. Some of the character decisions don't really make a ton of sense when you really think about it, and the villain isn't nearly as much of a presence in this one. It's not quite as complete and clean of a film as the past few have been. So I have to say that this final chapter is flawed, but I still did enjoy it. There's enough good here to like. It's really, really hard to craft a good and satisfying ending for your story, let alone the end of an 8-film franchise that spans almost 30 years. The actual ending of this film, where these characters end off, where the story ends, is still satisfying, but the film as a whole is just not quite up to the level as the last few Mission Impossible films. This is not a Mission Impossible film where I am blown away by it like I have been with some of the few in the past, but I would still recommend it. I want to give Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning a 3.5 out of 5. But that's it. That's my review of Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. Have you seen this film? Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a video. You can follow me on social media pretty much anywhere at CinemaSeth, and I'll see you next time.